A poor girl returns an expensive watch that fell out of a millionaire's wife's purse on the street. But she didn't know that this very watch would destroy a marriage, a friendship, and reveal a betrayal that had been hidden for years. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. Houston shimmered beneath the early evening sky, the city skyline glittering like a crown of glass and light. The streets hummed with life. Limousines, black SUVs, and sports cars crawled through traffic outside the Belvedere, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't need a sign. Men in tuxedos and women in designer dresses mingled on the steps, waiting for their chauffeurs, selfies, or maybe just a moment of recognition. Inside, the dining room buzzed with quiet opulence, crystal stemware, flickering candles, and the hushed murmurs of Texas oil tycoons, startup moguls, and second wives with perfect teeth and tired smiles. Walter Kingston stood near the host's podium, his shoulders square, his expression neutral, but his eyes tired in the way that only men with too much money and not enough meaning could understand. He was tall, with thinning salt and pepper hair, a strong jawline, and the kind of posture that made people stand straighter around him. He had built Kingston Resources from a regional gas supplier into one of the largest private energy conglomerates in the southern United States. At 60, he was still a presence, intimidating in boardrooms, respected in politics, admired on Forbes covers. His wife, May, emerged from the restroom and slid her arm through his. Younger by nearly 3 decades, she moved like someone who knew people watched her. Her champagne-colored gown caught the light just so, and her diamond earrings swung like punctuation marks at the end of a well-rehearsed sentence. She smiled up at him, that practiced news anchor smile she once wore on national television, back when she was America's darling. These days, she was the face of several philanthropic campaigns, women's shelters, literacy drives, child advocacy networks. She had cultivated the perfect blend of empathy and elegance. "That was lovely," she said as they stepped outside into the warm dusk. "Senator Burke wants to schedule a follow-up on that pipeline initiative. And did you see Gloria's face when I mentioned our new fund?" Walter gave a noncommittal grunt. The valet was already approaching with their sleek black Bentley, the engine humming like a beast held on a tight leash. May was still talking, details about upcoming events, foundation meetings, gala invitations, when Walter's attention shifted. Just as he reached for the passenger door handle, a soft voice behind him called out, "Sir?" He turned. A girl stood a few feet away, her figure half-shadowed by the glowing restaurant signage. She looked no older than 11 or 12, with tightly coiled hair tied back in a fraying pink ribbon. Her skin was a warm brown tone, and her sneakers, too big for her feet, were scuffed and peeling at the toes. A battered canvas backpack hung off one shoulder. In her small outstretched hand, she held a pair of elegant wristwatches, clearly men's, the gleam of platinum unmistakable even in the fading light. "I think these dropped from her bag," the girl said, glancing at May. Walter stepped forward, heart quickening. The watches weren't his, though they looked eerily like a model he'd once admired. He took them carefully. A slip of folded paper was tucked beneath the clasp. His name wasn't on it, but the handwriting was unmistakably feminine. "For the man who makes my heart forget how to beat." He looked at May, whose face had frozen in a rictus smile. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then she gave a little laugh, too high-pitched. "Oh, that's not mine. Must have been in my purse by mistake," she said, plucking the watches from his hand and shoving them into her clutch. "Probably something from the office. I had to do a TV segment this week on luxury counterfeits." Walter nodded slowly. The girl was still there, watching. "What's your name?" he asked. "Riley," she said. "Thank you, Riley. That was very honest of you." She shrugged. "Didn't feel right just walking off with it." May smiled thinly. "Very kind of you, sweetheart. Thank you. Have a good night." But Riley wasn't looking at her. She was looking at Walter. Something about her gaze stuck with him long after she disappeared into the shadows of the city. The Bentley rolled away from the curb, and May immediately shifted back into her public persona, talking about an upcoming photo shoot for the American Hearts Foundation. But Walter wasn't listening. His thoughts were tumbling in quiet, measured circles. The watch was real. He knew that the moment it touched his palm. And the note, it wasn't generic, it was intimate. Intentionally so. The kind of thing lovers wrote to each other when they still believed in stolen moments. He didn't accuse her. Not yet. Walter Kingston had built an empire on discipline, on waiting for the right moment to strike. Instead, he turned his face toward the window and watched Houston blur by. Downtown lights gave way to high-rises, then gated communities and manicured lawns. Their mansion sat at the edge of River Oaks, 3 floors of glass and stone that overlooked a private golf course. The house was lit like a jewelry box when they pulled up. Inside, the staff moved in quiet, ghost-like patterns, the chef finishing up dessert prep, the housekeeper setting out tomorrow's clothes. May disappeared upstairs to change. Walter went into his study. The door shut behind him with a soft click. He placed the watches on the desk, unfolded the note, and read it again. The handwriting was smooth, cursive, and assured. He'd never seen it before, not May's, not even close. He didn't like assumptions. That was what made him lethal in business. He verified before he trusted. That rule had saved him a dozen times. Once from a hostile takeover, once from a cyber breach, once from a fake investment pitch that could have cost him $70 million. And now it echoed again. Verify before you trust. But what troubled him more than the note was May's reaction. Not surprise, not confusion. She had frozen, recalibrated, and manufactured a lie in seconds. It was the kind of composure you didn't learn from marriage or acting. It was the kind of control honed by years of deception. He took a slow breath and opened his laptop. 10 minutes later, he had logged into his company's private security server. The Kingston estate had internal surveillance, mostly for safety. He queued up the foyer footage from earlier that day. There she was. May, in that same champagne dress, returning from a site visit at the women's shelter. She passed through the entranceway, clutching her designer tote. She set it down on the table briefly, then moved toward the sitting room. When she returned, she had added a small leather pouch to her bag. Walter leaned closer, zoomed in. The pouch looked familiar. A watch case. He rewound, played it again. She had retrieved it from her private desk drawer, the one he hadn't opened in years. He sat back in his chair. There were 2 possible conclusions. 1, she had received the gift earlier that day, added it to her bag, and forgot it was there. Or 2, and he found himself leaning heavily toward 2, she had taken it with her for a reason. A meeting. A rendezvous. Something intimate. But the girl had seen it fall. That wasn't part of May's plan. Riley. The name surfaced again like a buoy. She hadn't hesitated. She had done what most kids wouldn't. Returned something valuable with no expectation of reward. Walter couldn't remember the last time someone had done something for him without trying to gain from it. He folded the note again, placed it in a separate drawer, and locked it. He would ask questions tomorrow, but for now, he poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and sat back, watching the video loop of his wife's afternoon play again and again, like a scene from a thriller he already knew the ending to. Upstairs, May was humming, but Walter Kingston had already stopped hearing her. The next morning arrived with a gray Texas sky and a biting wind that rattled the windows of the Kingston estate. Walter woke before sunrise, as he always did, and stood for several minutes at the bedroom window, watching the clouds shift like bruises across the horizon. The city below was just beginning to stir, delivery trucks making rounds, joggers with neon shoes weaving through gated lanes, sprinklers hissing softly over flawless lawns. But there was no peace in the symmetry. May was still asleep, her back turned toward him, her breathing slow and even beneath the silk sheets. He studied her silhouette carefully. She looked so composed, so trustworthy in repose, but Walter now understood what a performance that stillness could be. He didn't wake her. Instead, he shaved, dressed, and headed down to the dining room where the housekeeper was already setting out breakfast. Steel-cut oats with berries, sliced avocado, soft-boiled eggs arranged like museum pieces on fine china. May joined him 10 minutes later in a navy blue pantsuit, radiant, fresh, and ready to face the world. She kissed his cheek and poured herself tea. They made small talk. She mentioned a meeting with the board of her foundation, a potential interview with NPR, a weekend trip to Dallas she was strongly considering to meet with a shelter director. He nodded through it all, pretending to listen, eyes never leaving his plate. At one point, she reached across the table and touched his hand. "You seem distant this morning. Everything okay?" "Just tired," he replied. "Didn't sleep well." She smiled gently, like a woman married to a man who was slowly slipping into age and fog. "Maybe we should schedule that full checkup Dr. Alvarez keeps talking about. Just a routine thing." He met her eyes and smiled back. "Sure, routine." After breakfast, she left in her pearl-white Tesla, supposedly for a planning session about a benefit gala. Walter watched the vehicle disappear past the gate, then returned to his office and made the call. Dominic Hill was not your typical security expert. A former NSA field operative with a decade's worth of experience in cyber forensics, he had been working for Walter discreetly for the past 6 years. Dominic was clean-cut, brutally efficient, and allergic to unnecessary words. When he arrived at the estate an hour later, he brought with him a laptop, a secure phone, and 3 burner devices. "You want to know where she's going, who she's seeing, what she's hiding," Dominic said, standing in Walter's study. Walter didn't bother pretending otherwise. "Yes, quietly. No external contractors. I want you to install location tracking on her devices, run diagnostics on her communications, and I want facial recognition surveillance tied to her phone's movement." Dominic nodded. "Any legal constraints?" Walter gave him a cold smile. "I'm a private citizen investigating the misuse of shared marital assets. You know the rules. I'll start today. And, Dominic," Walter added as the man turned to leave, "no one can know, not even the house staff. If something leaks, I'll know it's you. Understood." By afternoon, Dominic had deployed everything. May's phone was cloned, her calendar scraped, and a GPS tag affixed to her car's diagnostic port. Walter didn't expect immediate answers, but he didn't need to wait long either. Later that evening, he sat by the fireplace pretending to read a business journal when May walked in, humming a melody he didn't recognize. She poured herself a glass of white wine and curled into the armchair opposite his, scrolling through her phone. "How was the meeting?" he asked. "Oh, exhausting. There's so much chaos and nonprofit work you wouldn't believe it. One of our donors is insisting we expand into Oklahoma. Can you imagine?" Walter chuckled. "You're too good to them, always pushing past your limits." "I try," she said with a wink. He watched her for another moment, then glanced down at the page again. The article was about mergers. He wasn't reading it. That night, after May fell asleep, Walter crept into his study and opened the secure laptop Dominic had left him. The screen flickered on, revealing a digital map dotted with timestamps. Her car had made 2 significant stops that day, one at a midtown office building, not suspicious, and another at a hotel off I-10, not far from Memorial Park. Walter zoomed in. The reservation belonged to Jason Brooks. The name hit him like a punch. Jason wasn't just a colleague or a friend. He was his closest confidant, the man who had once delivered the eulogy at Walter's son's funeral, who had shared tears and bourbon with him on nights when life had lost all direction. Jason had helped him draft parts of his will. He had vouched for May when Walter was first introduced to her at a fundraiser. His stomach turned. Walter leaned back, staring at the name. The next file was even worse, a time-stamped photo from a street-level camera. Jason and May entering the hotel lobby 20 minutes apart, both wearing sunglasses. No luggage, no room keys visible. Not a coincidence. Dominic had included screenshots of calendar entries, too. May's phone showed nothing unusual, but Jason's private assistant had forwarded an internal note, thinking it was for Walter's review. M&M meeting capital alignment structure, keep off primary calendar. M&M Walter exhaled slowly. The next morning, as he passed through the foyer on the way to a corporate board call, he spotted movement outside the gate. A flash of pink. A ribbon. He paused, then stepped outside. Riley was there, standing near the sidewalk, a small tray of chocolate bars slung across her chest with a faded sash that read, "Support our school." Walter walked up to her. "You again," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you out here." Riley grinned. "I didn't expect to see you either, mister." "Selling for school?" She nodded. "Field trip fundraiser. We're trying to get to Austin." Walter studied her face. She was younger than he'd thought. Bright eyes, sharp gaze, not afraid of much. "You remember my wife? The lady from the restaurant?" "Yeah, sure I do." "Have you ever seen her around before?" The girl hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe. She comes near my grandma's place sometimes, not with you though, with someone else. Tall guy, beard." Walter's chest tightened. "You ever see where they went?" Riley leaned closer, lowering her voice like they were in on a secret. "There's this little place behind that old hotel off the highway. They go in, come out like 15 minutes later, real quick." "You sure it was her?" "I don't forget faces. She's got them shiny shoes, you know." Walter pulled out his wallet and handed her a $100 bill. "Keep the chocolate. And if you remember anything else, come see me again. My house is the one with the iron gate." "Okay," she said, folding the bill carefully. "Thanks, mister." As she walked away, Walter stood motionless. The wind blew through the trees, and in the distance the faint whine of traffic blurred the edge of the world. His wife and his best friend, together, careless enough to be seen by a child. He turned back toward the house, the weight of truth pressing hard on his shoulders. Later that day, Dominic arrived with a small envelope. "Found something," he said. "She's got an email account on a private Russian relay, only sends encrypted messages to one recipient." "Let me guess," Walter said bitterly. "Jason Brooks." Dominic nodded. "I also pulled a few more financials. You're not going to like what you see." Walter opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, shell accounts, offshore transfers, all linked to a supposedly charitable fund co-managed by May. The American Hearts Foundation had received over $10 million in the past 2 years, most of it from Kingston Resources, but less than 5% had been used for verifiable outreach. The rest was missing. Gone. Dispersed into tax havens, routed through nonprofit layers with no employees and no real addresses. The fund had 2 primary administrators, May Kingston and Jason Brooks. Walter's heart slowed to a crawl. They weren't just sleeping together, they were stealing from him, dismantling his empire from the inside, one invoice at a time. He closed the folder and rested his head in his hands. The walls of his house were tall and impenetrable. The gates were steel. The alarms were cutting edge. But the enemy had never been outside. They had been dining at his table all along. The following days unfolded like a slow descent through fog, every step more uncertain than the last. Walter no longer pretended to see the world as he had a week ago. His estate, once a fortress of safety and prestige, now felt like an elaborate stage, marble floors, velvet curtains, and behind them, treachery. The woman who shared his bed was a stranger in plain sight. The man who had once comforted him at his son's funeral was quietly dismantling the legacy they'd built together. Walter Kingston had never been afraid of battle, but this was no boardroom skirmish. This was war on the home front. Each morning he went through the motions. Breakfast was eaten in silence. May remained chirpy, increasingly affectionate, her concern for his well-being dialed up with suspicious precision. "You really should talk to Dr. Alvarez," she said one morning over coffee. "Just a checkup. You've been forgetting things lately." "I have?" he asked, his voice flat. "Little things," she said with a gentle smile. "You left your keys in the freezer 2 nights ago." Walter nodded thoughtfully, as though trying to recall. "That doesn't sound like me." "I know," she said, brushing his hand. "That's why it worries me." He studied her face, her eyes filled with convincing worry. If he hadn't already known, he might have believed her. But now he understood her language, every gesture calculated, every word crafted like a script. She wasn't concerned for him. She was preparing the stage for his removal. After breakfast, he retreated to his study, where Dominic waited with a fresh batch of documents. Walter closed the door and sat down heavily. The air smelled faintly of leather and aged wood, a familiar scent that used to calm him. Now it felt hollow. Dominic handed him a manila envelope. "Here's the full breakdown. The American Hearts Foundation has diverted over $12 million in company funds across 6 shell corporations in the past year, all routed through dummy charities registered in Delaware, Belize, and Cyprus. I confirmed the officers of record are either dead or fabricated. The documents tie everything to Jason Brooks and May Kingston." Walter opened the folder and flipped through the spreadsheets and transfer logs. It was all there, clear as day. His signature had been forged on 2 of the transfer approvals. The dates lined up with weekends he had been at his ranch. He felt his jaw tighten. "What about the medical component?" he asked. Dominic leaned forward. "You're going to like this even less. May's been in contact with a psychiatrist, Dr. Daniel Mills. He's based out of a private clinic north of the city near Lake Conroe. Reputation is murky. Some whispers in private forums about guardianship fraud and non-consensual admissions. She wants me committed. It looks that way. There's already a document in progress. Preliminary mental competence evaluation. noting signs of early-stage dementia. Signed by Dr. Mills, dated next week. Walter stared at the paper, a slow breath leaving his lungs. She's trying to erase me from my own life. Dominic didn't reply. They both knew what this meant. Once the medical diagnosis was on file, a judge could authorize May to take over as legal guardian. She'd gain control of his estate, his assets, the company shares, everything. "What about Riley?" Walter asked, suddenly remembering the girl's quiet bravery. "Any word on her?" "She showed up at your gate again yesterday. Said she thought she saw your wife meeting the same man, Jason Brooks, near an abandoned office complex on Oakmere Drive. I ran a check. The building's been off-grid for years. No leasing records, no active utilities, but cameras still work. I pulled the footage." Dominic turned his laptop around and hit play. The grainy black and white clip showed a familiar vehicle pulling into the lot. May stepped out. 5 minutes later, Jason arrived in a different car. They both entered the building, then re-emerged 20 minutes later. May with a tablet in hand, Jason with a briefcase. Walter sat in silence, watching the loop play again. "Did Riley see all that?" he asked. "No, just the tail end. She's sharp, though. I don't think she realizes how dangerous this is, but she knows something's off. She's a child, Dominic. She's also the only other person who's seen them together multiple times. The fact that she's noticed puts her at risk." Walter rubbed his face, fatigue beginning to settle like a lead weight in his bones. "I want her and her grandmother moved, somewhere safe, no traceable address. Put them under round-the-clock surveillance. You got it. And I want to take control of my assets now, before they try to remove me legally." Dominic nodded. "I've been preparing for that. We can transfer operational authority into a holding trust, one that only activates under your direct biometric input. Once it's in place, no one, not May, not Jason, can touch a cent without your confirmation in person. Do it." It took 3 days. By the time the documents were finalized, Walter had moved his legal authority into a secure trust managed by a network of lawyers loyal to him, not the company. He made sure no single person had enough power to alter decisions unilaterally. Everything now required his presence, a multi-point verification, and a voice-encoded authentication code. It wasn't foolproof, but it bought him time. On the 4th morning, he told May he was going to visit an old friend in Dallas. She smiled and offered to pack him a bag. "You sure you're okay driving all that way?" "I need the quiet," he said. "Some time to clear my head." She kissed him on the cheek and helped him load the car. He noticed her slip something into her pocket as he pulled out of the driveway. A phone call, perhaps, or a message to Jason. Walter didn't go to Dallas. He drove to a private estate outside Huntsville where Riley and her grandmother had been relocated under Dominic's arrangement. The house was modest but secure, nestled in a grove of old oak trees, with a wraparound porch and a pair of retired Marine guards posing as landscapers. Riley was outside reading when he arrived. She looked up and waved, her expression lighting up with something that startled him, genuine warmth. "You came," she said. "I told you I would." She stood awkwardly, unsure if she should hug him, shake his hand, or salute him like one of the guards. Walter crouched down slightly. "I need to ask you a few questions. Are you okay with that?" She nodded. "Yeah, I'm not scared." "You should be," he said softly. "But that's why I brought you here, so you don't have to be." They sat on the porch for an hour. She told him about the cars she'd seen, the things she overheard. Her memory was remarkable. Names, locations, even snippets of conversations. "They said you're going to forget things," she said at one point. that you're old and confused, that they'll take over soon. She said, he's more fragile than he thinks. Walter didn't react, but his hands clenched the armrest of the chair until his knuckles turned white. "Thank you, Riley," he said at last. "You've done more for me than most grown adults would. Does that mean you'll fix it?" "I'm going to try." He left the estate after dark, returning to Houston with a plan forming in his mind. The trust was in place. Riley and her grandmother were safe. Now came the performance. The following evening, he started acting forgetful. At dinner, he called his assistant by the wrong name. He misplaced his fork. He signed a document upside down and laughed it off like an old man losing his edge. May watched him carefully. Not with sympathy. With calculation. 3 days later, she called Dr. Mills. Walter found the call log on her phone while she was in the shower. The appointment was set for Friday afternoon, an in-home evaluation under the pretense of a wellness check. He smiled. Let them come. Let them try. The closer they got, the more they'd reveal. He'd been underestimated before, and it had always been a mistake. This time would be no different. The sky above Houston was clear and unreasonably blue on the morning they came for him. Walter sat alone in his sun-drenched study, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the grandfather clock and the occasional rustle of wind against the French doors. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, painting golden lines across the floor. He had chosen to sit in the exact place where, just a few weeks earlier, he had first read the note tucked into the stolen watch. That moment, quiet and unassuming, had triggered the unraveling of everything he had once trusted. And now it was here, what May and Jason had been working toward all along, the culmination of their plan. He was dressed neatly in a gray sweater and slacks, his face freshly shaved, his hair combed back with his usual precision. A cup of black coffee sat untouched on the desk beside him, growing colder by the minute. He stared at nothing in particular, allowing his expression to drift into a hazy, unfocused gaze. The illusion of mental decline had become a performance he could switch on and off with frightening ease. Forgetfulness had become his weapon. Confusion, his armor. At precisely 11 a.m., May entered the study with a soft knock, her smile warm and casual. She wore a lavender blouse and pearl earrings, the picture of composed concern. Her heels clicked softly against the hardwood floor. "Walter, sweetheart, Dr. Mills is here," she said gently, as if speaking to a man whose mind could no longer process normal tones. He turned slowly, blinking twice before answering. "Dr. Mills?" She nodded, taking a careful step closer. "Remember? The wellness check we scheduled. You've been feeling a little off lately." He nodded vaguely, lowering his eyes to the floor. "Oh, yes, of course, right." She reached out and lightly touched his shoulder. "Don't worry, it's just a routine thing. He's very professional. You'll like him." Walter offered a slow, uncertain smile. "If you say so." A moment later, Dr. Daniel Mills entered the room with a well-practiced air of casual authority. He was in his late 40s, with short dark hair and a navy blazer over slacks. His briefcase swung gently at his side. His face, while polite, held the smug detachment of a man who believed himself in control of every room he entered. "Mr. Kingston," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for making time for me today." Walter shook his hand slowly. "Of course, I appreciate you coming." "May has told me you've been feeling a little disoriented lately," Dr. Mills said, settling into the leather armchair across from Walter's desk. "We thought it might be helpful to do a quick evaluation here in the comfort of your home." Yes, I suppose I've been misplacing things, getting turned around in conversations. May sat beside the doctor, legs crossed, hands folded demurely in her lap. She smiled softly at Walter, nodding supportively. "That's perfectly normal at your age," Dr. Mills said kindly, opening his tablet. "But we like to get ahead of these things before they become a concern. Would you mind if I asked you a few simple questions?" Walter nodded. "Go ahead." The questions were standard. The date, the current president. Count backward from 100 by sevens. Spell world in reverse. Walter stumbled at the right moments, hesitated just enough, mixed up names deliberately. His eyes occasionally drifted as though distracted. At one point, he rubbed his temples and murmured, "This is harder than it used to be." Dr. Mills made quiet notes, occasionally glancing at May, who returned a look of rehearsed worry. After 20 minutes, the doctor closed his tablet and leaned back slightly. "Mr. Kingston, thank you. That was very helpful. Was I okay?" "You're doing fine," the doctor said smoothly. "There are just a few signs that suggest we may want to look into additional tests. Purely preventative, of course." Walter nodded. "Whatever you think is best. I'd like to schedule a brief stay at my clinic, 3 or 4 days, just to run a full battery of cognitive assessments in a controlled environment." May leaned forward. "That sounds like a great idea. I can help coordinate." Walter looked at them both with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. "If it helps, yes. I trust you." The trap was nearly complete. Dr. Mills stood to leave, promising to send over the paperwork that afternoon. May walked him out, murmuring reassurances and thanks. Walter remained in the chair, his fingers resting on the carved wooden armrest, his breathing steady. The next part would be trickier. At 2 o'clock, Jason arrived. He entered through the back door as if still pretending discretion mattered. Walter watched him on the monitor feed from his study. Jason was dressed casually, his sleeves rolled up, a messenger bag slung over his shoulder. He looked at ease, confident, as though everything was going exactly as planned. May met him in the hallway with a kiss to the cheek. Walter turned off the monitor and stood. He walked slowly to the main parlor, where he knew they would go to finalize the final blow. They were already seated on the couch when he entered. Jason rose with a sympathetic expression, holding out a folder. "Hey, Walt," he said. "May told me about Dr. Mills. I just wanted to stop by, offer my support, and bring some things to help streamline the company's operations while you take time to focus on your health." Walter took the folder and opened it. Inside were a series of legal documents: temporary power of attorney, financial oversight delegation forms, board reassignments. "I know it's a lot," Jason continued, "but it's just a formality. You sign these, and May and I will handle things for a few weeks, make sure the company runs smoothly while you get some rest." Walter scanned the first page, then the second. His name was printed at the bottom. The signature line waited patiently. May leaned forward, her voice gentle. "It's just temporary, sweetheart. You'll be back to work in no time." Walter looked up at them, then back at the papers. "And this is all necessary?" Jason nodded. "It's for your protection, for the shareholders, for everyone." Walter set the folder down on the table. His voice was quiet. "It's interesting." "What is?" Jason asked. "That you think I didn't see this coming." May's smile froze. "What do you mean?" she asked lightly. Walter rose slowly from his chair and walked to the cabinet. He poured himself a glass of water, took a long sip, and turned to face them. "You really should have destroyed that note, May. The one in the watch. It was sloppy." Jason's eyes flicked to May, then back to Walter. You've both been very careful, Walter continued. I'll give you that. The shell companies, the private emails, the hotel meetings, even the forged transfers. Impressive. But not perfect. May stood. Walter, I think you're confused. Walter smiled. Do I look confused? Jason reached for his bag. Walt, maybe we should all sit down. Walter raised his voice. Dominic. The study door opened and Dominic stepped in, followed by two plainclothes federal agents. Jason froze. May backed toward the fireplace. What the hell is this? Jason snapped. This, Walter said calmly, is your reckoning. The agents crossed the room quickly. Jason lunged for his bag. Too late. One agent pinned him against the wall while the other pulled the folder from Walter's desk. May shouted, You can't do this. This is entrapment. Walter turned to her. You tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. You falsified medical records. You siphoned millions from a publicly accountable company. You coordinated with a licensed physician to imprison me in a psychiatric facility. Her hands were trembling. I didn't know. Jason handled everything. Jason laughed bitterly from the floor. You were in it from the start. Don't act innocent now. Walter watched them both, feeling nothing. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just an empty, bitter clarity. Dr. Mills was arrested the same hour at his clinic. His office was raided, and among his files were dozens of forged evaluations, including Walter's, pre-signed and dated days in advance. His license was immediately suspended. By sunset, the house was quiet again. Walter stood in the parlor alone, staring at the fireplace where his wife had once stood, pretending to care for him. The smoke had cleared. The lies had collapsed. He walked to his study, poured himself a fresh glass of scotch, and dialed the secure line to Dominic. Status on Riley? She's safe, Dominic replied. No signs of anyone tracking her. We're rotating the guards every 8 hours. Walter closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. Good. Keep it that way. Because while the storm had passed inside his home, he knew there were still aftershocks to come. The headlines, the legal battles, the inevitable damage control. But for now at least, he had won. They had come to break him. And instead, he had broken them. The headlines hit the following morning like a hammer dropped from a great height. The Houston Chronicle broke the story first, followed swiftly by Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, and a flood of local outlets whose news vans crowded outside the Kingston estate before the sun had fully risen. The story spread like wildfire. The chairman of Kingston Resources had narrowly escaped a planned guardianship conspiracy orchestrated by his wife and longtime business partner. Authorities confirmed the arrest. Photos of Jason Brooks being led out of a downtown holding facility in handcuffs looped endlessly on morning news broadcasts. May Kingston's image, pale and stony in a beige jail-issued jumpsuit, accompanied every article. For a city that had long revered the Kingston name, it was a scandal of Shakespearean proportions. Walter watched it unfold from his study with the television volume turned low. He didn't need the sound. The images spoke well enough. The world now saw what he had come to know intimately. Betrayal could wear a tuxedo, smile in family portraits, and sleep on the pillow beside you. He sat in the armchair by the window, sipping strong black coffee as reporters speculated on motives, court dates, and the depth of financial fraud involved. Dominic entered with a tablet in hand. His face was calm, but the light in his eyes hinted at the long nights he had worked to orchestrate the takedown. State prosecutor just filed the preliminary indictment, Dominic said. 23 counts for Jason, 19 for May. Mills is cooperating, cutting a deal. He's turning over everything, including records on 4 other high-profile guardianship fraud cases. Walter nodded without looking away from the screen. They'll drag this out. Hire spin doctors. Plead for leniency. They'll try. But public sentiment isn't on their side. You've already regained control of the board. The foundation accounts are frozen. Civil suits will follow, but with the trust structures we implemented, your assets are protected. And Riley? Still secure. Guard rotation remains in place. No one's approached the property. She's fine, Walter. He turned his eyes from the screen at last. I want to see her. Dominic hesitated. Today? Yes, today. An hour later, Walter was behind the wheel of his private SUV, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans. He drove alone this time, a quiet nod to the fact that trust was not something he handed out easily anymore. The roads out of Houston curved gently through pine groves and suburban farmland, the chaos of the city falling away in the rearview mirror. The air smelled of cedar and distant rain. It felt cleaner, simpler. The safe house stood at the edge of a wooded tract in Montgomery County, modest on the outside, but wired to the teeth with security. 2 guards greeted him at the gate, checked his ID, and waved him through. Riley was on the porch when he arrived, her knees pulled to her chest, a paperback open in her lap. Her hair was tied back in 2 tight braids, and she wore a navy hoodie several sizes too large. She stood when she saw him, but didn't run forward like a child might have. She waited. Walter approached slowly. Hey, she said. He climbed the steps and lowered himself onto the bench beside her. What are you reading? The Outsiders. My teacher said I'd like it. Do you? She nodded. It's about people pretending to be something they're not. People thinking they're bad just 'cause they're poor. But some of them aren't. Walter exhaled through his nose, a breath that carried more weight than she could understand. Smart teacher. They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Are they in jail now? She asked. Yes, and they'll stay there for a long time. She looked up at him. Because of me? He turned toward her, shaking his head. No, because of what they did. You just helped me see it. She looked away, her face tightening. I didn't mean to get in the middle of it. I know, and I'm sorry you had to. That shouldn't have happened to you. I'm used to people lying, she said. You just were the first one who seemed like maybe you wouldn't. He didn't know what to say to that. In business, words were his currency. But in this moment, the silence was more honest. I want to make sure you're safe, he said finally. That you and your grandmother don't ever have to look over your shoulder again. No more hiding. No more cheap apartments or broken heaters or looking for lost jewelry just to do the right thing. Riley's brow furrowed. We're okay. We've always gotten by. That's not enough, Walter said. You deserve better. You deserved security, opportunity, respect. She shrugged. You can't give someone all that just because they found a watch. You didn't just find a watch, he said, his voice suddenly sharp with emotion. You gave it back. You saw something wrong and you didn't ignore it. You didn't ask for anything. You helped me when you had no reason to. That's character. That's more than some adults I've known for 20 years. Her expression softened, and she looked at him not with awe or confusion, but something like curiosity. Why are you really here, Mr. Kingston? He took a long breath. Because I thought I had everything figured out. Money, legacy, power, but I didn't. I was surrounded by people who smiled to my face and gutted me behind my back. And then you came along, someone with no agenda, no angle, just decency. Riley didn't say anything. She only looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "I don't know what happens next," she said, "but my grandma says people show you who they are when things go bad, not when they're good." Walter smiled faintly. "Your grandmother is a wise woman." They went inside together. Her grandmother greeted him warmly, her posture cautious but her eyes kind. She served them sweet tea and asked no questions about the news. Walter stayed for dinner, eating simple food at a worn wooden table that felt more honest than anything served in his marble dining room. They laughed over stories from Riley's school. They watched a movie on a small television that flickered occasionally, but never lost its warmth. That night, as he drove back toward Houston, Walter knew something had shifted in him. He no longer wanted to be merely a man who survived betrayal. He wanted to become someone worthy of the faith a child had placed in him without asking for a thing in return. The following week, Walter began setting up a new fund, not a public-facing photo op foundation like the one May had used to steal millions. This one was quiet, focused, private. Its purpose was simple: to provide housing, education, and long-term support to children like Riley. Kids who fell through the cracks. Kids who still believed in doing the right thing even when the world didn't reward them for it. He named it the Watchlight Fund. On paper, Riley and her grandmother became its first beneficiaries. But in Walter's heart, she had already become something far greater than a recipient. She was a mirror, a compass, the proof that not all good was gone from the world. By the end of the month, the estate was quiet again. The reporters had moved on. The board meetings resumed under Walter's guidance. Shareholders expressed cautious relief. Stocks stabilized. The world spun on. But Walter Kingston no longer measured success in stock valuations or media sound bites. He measured it in the steady, quiet progress of a girl who had once stood on a rain-slicked sidewalk and handed him back the truth he hadn't been ready to see. The reckoning had come and gone. Now it was time to rebuild. The days passed more gently now. For the first time in years, Walter Kingston woke without that familiar weight on his chest, that quiet dread that had settled there long before he'd recognized its name. The betrayal, the fraud, the slow suffocation of trust. All of it had left a scar, but not an open wound. The house was quieter. No more footsteps in the marble corridors pretending to be love. No more stolen glances across dining tables. And in that stillness, something unexpected had taken root. Not loneliness, but possibility. Riley came to visit the estate for the first time one sunny afternoon in April. The invitation had been open for weeks, but she had hesitated. Her grandmother was the one who called Walter to say, finally, "She's ready." He had sent a car, though Riley insisted on sitting in the front seat next to the driver. When she stepped out at the gate, wearing her favorite hoodie and a pair of second-hand jeans, Walter greeted her himself at the top of the stairs. "You're taller," he said. "No, you're just getting shorter." He laughed and opened the door for her. She walked through the house slowly, taking it in. The high ceilings, the polished wood, the rows of books in the study, the enormous kitchen with its chrome fixtures. She didn't gawk or gasp. Riley didn't gawk at anything. But she noticed everything. Her eyes moved like someone mapping a landscape she didn't trust yet. "Do you like it?" he asked after showing her the backyard. "It's nice," she said, then added after a moment. "Big, though. You ever get lonely in a place this size?" "Sometimes." She nodded like that made perfect sense. Back at our apartment, the walls are so thin I can hear the people upstairs arguing about food stamps. We always know when the baby starts crying. It's annoying, but it makes you feel like you're not alone. Would you trade it? For quiet? She said. Maybe, but not for pretending. Walter didn't reply. They sat beneath the pergola, where vines were just beginning to bloom, the sky overhead streaked with wisps of white cloud. A light breeze stirred the air, and the scent of fresh earth and wild roses drifted over the patio. The staff remained discreet, watching from a distance but never interrupting. Riley glanced at the gardener across the lawn. They all work for you? They work with me, he corrected. You pay them though, right? Yes. Then they work for you. Walter smiled. Fair enough. She looked around again. This place is huge. You ever get lost? I used to. Now I know every corner. Bet you didn't know where the snakes hide, though. That caught him off guard. He laughed, an honest, full sound, and shook his head. No, Riley, I didn't. Not until one of them bit me. She smirked. Next time, get a flashlight. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking the grounds. She asked 1,000 questions about the company, the trees, the portraits on the wall. She wanted to know what kind of flowers were planted by the driveway and how much one of the marble statues cost. Walter answered everything without deflecting or overselling. She wasn't impressed by wealth. She was impressed by truth. In the following weeks, she returned more often. Sometimes with her grandmother, sometimes alone. Her visits became routine. She helped in the garden. She sat in on meetings with Walter's new outreach director for the Watchlight Fund. She even asked to shadow one of the junior analysts during a financial briefing, just to see what people do when they're trying to sound smart. Walter gave her access, but with boundaries. Trust didn't mean throwing her into the deep end. It meant guiding her, teaching her, letting her see what was behind the curtain, not just a performance. She absorbed it all with the kind of focused intensity he'd only ever seen in himself when he was young. He started calling her Miss Riley in front of the staff, which she pretended to hate but secretly loved. She teased him mercilessly when he lost his place in a speech or forgot where he left his reading glasses. He bought her a proper laptop after she fixed his printer using a YouTube tutorial. She refused to take it unless it was labeled as a company asset. It's a tool, she said, not a gift. That was Riley. Always set in her own terms. One morning, after a late spring thunderstorm had left the lawn soaked and the air smelling of rain and pollen, she knocked on the door to his study holding a brown folder. Inside were hand-drawn diagrams, a mock website homepage, and a list of ideas for how the Watchlight Fund could expand its impact without attracting media attention. I stayed up last night thinking, she said. There are other kids like me. Ones who don't even know they're allowed to ask for help. Walter sat in silence, turning the pages slowly. Her logic was sharp, her ideas practical. Her suggestions ranged from building micro-grants to subsidize school meals to connecting youth mentors from disadvantaged neighborhoods with job-shadowing programs in private companies. You wrote all this yourself? With a little help from Google. He leaned back in his chair. What do you want from me? A seat? He raised an eyebrow. At the board? No, she said, at the table. I want to help make the decisions. Walter smiled. And your grandmother? She said it's about time someone like me stopped waiting for permission. He tapped the folder against the desk. All right then, you've got a seat. It was more symbolic than functional at first. She attended meetings, took notes, offered feedback. But the other board members quickly realized she wasn't a token face. She asked hard questions. She challenged assumptions, and when she didn't understand something, she learned fast. By the summer, Riley had become more than a visitor. She was a presence. Walter took her and her grandmother to the ranch he used to escape to during difficult times, before May turned it into a backdrop for photo ops. There, he taught Riley how to ride a horse, how to clean a rifle, how to build a fire from wet wood. She taught him how to use TikTok, how to identify a fake Instagram page, and how to say vibe check without sounding like a confused grandfather. Their bond was strange, unexpected, but real. It wasn't the bond of father and daughter. There was too much space between their lives for that. It was something else, something forged in the fire of shared clarity. They both had been lied to. They both had learned to see through people, and they both had chosen to act even when silence would have been safer. One night, as the cicadas droned in the dark and the stars shimmered above the open fields, Riley sat beside him by the fire pit. "You ever think about your family?" she asked. "Before all this?" He stared into the flames. "I used to. Less now." "Why?" "Because I've spent enough time mourning what was. I'd rather build what could be." She nodded, hugging her knees. "I think that's what we're doing now." He reached over and gently squeezed her shoulder. "Yeah, I think we are." The world outside the ranch still moved in chaos. Trials were pending. The media buzzed on occasion. Jason's legal team tried to deflect, to delay. May attempted to paint herself as manipulated. But Walter didn't attend the hearings. He issued a single statement through his legal team. "I will not waste my peace on people who never valued it to begin with." Instead, he turned his attention to building. The Watchlight Fund opened 2 new offices in Houston and Dallas by year's end. Dozens of children received scholarships, safe housing, and mentorship opportunities. Riley helped interview the first batch of applicants. She spoke at a closed donor dinner and made half the room cry. She didn't dramatize her story. She told the truth plainly. The kind of truth people weren't used to hearing from a girl with frayed cuffs and a fearless gaze. Walter watched her speak and thought, not for the first time, that everything he'd lost had somehow led to this moment, this clarity, this renewal. He hadn't expected to find family in the aftermath of betrayal.